Blissin Up, people. That's right. It's time to listen to the sparks of bliss in your life. I'm your host and life coach, Caroline de Posada from Miami, Florida. And this podcast is an invitation to join me in upgrading our mindset, wellness, and relationships so that together we create a life that unlocks our bliss. Join me each week as we explore practical strategies, inspiring stories, and the moments of clarity, or as we like to call them, los momenticos, that make the world a little more magical. Consider this your weekly dose of wisdom in your pocket. Are you ready? Let's do this.
Hey, Blissiners, welcome to episode number 51 of Blissin Up. So the purpose of this podcast is to help you find the bliss that's already within you. It's meant to teach you how to listen for it and how to create a life that leads you towards your bliss with intention. And that is precisely why today's question is so important. And that is, how do you align with bliss amidst so much pain and heartbreak in the world? Now, I've personally been in the situation where I experience pain. I've grieved the loss of my father. I endured my sister going through an amputation last summer, and I've faced other heartbreaking chapters in my personal life. And I've also been in the situation where I have felt pain as if it's my own, even though it's not directly mine. The biggest example of that is when my soul sister's daughter passed away, Betsy and Aline. They're a couple, they're very close to me, near and dear to my heart, and their daughter passed away when she was only 2 years and 9 months old. And even though I wasn't that little girl's mother, that heartbreak hit so close to home that it felt like it was my pain for a long time. And even today, I think about it and it still feels like it's something that's mine, right? But I've also been exposed to pain that I'm not directly connected to, and yet I still feel deeply. Like, for example, when Kobe Bryant and all those families died in that helicopter, I remember experiencing that sense of mourning and not being directly tied to those families, but just feeling such a sense of loss for those the survivors of the people that died on that helicopter plane. And recently, I've just heard so many stories. There was a sophomore that just died unexpectedly during a water polo game here in our community, which I didn't know the family, but it had a ripple effect, and I just felt the loss so deeply. There was a 39-year-old father of 3 small children who was heli skiing and in Alaska, and an avalanche took them down, and he died buried in the snow, leaving behind a wife and 3 little kids. And recently, one of my dear friends lost her best friend to a sudden massive heart attack. And those are just stories of people that I am aware of. But even beyond those moments, we also know that there is so much pain in the world that maybe we aren't experiencing firsthand, but we know is happening right now. There's death, there's hunger, there's human trafficking, there's war. Right now, there is so much heartbreak going on with Israel and Palestine, and layoffs, government cutoffs, the fear, chaos, uncertainty. There is so much going on. And if you look for it, you can find even more, that it can feel wrong to experience bliss when everything around you feels like it's unraveling. It can feel selfish to be celebrating on social media or smiling about life when someone else is burying a child. So how then, in good conscience, do you align with a life that sparks bliss when you know about the pain? I've questioned, does this mean we have to ignore what's happening around us? Is it out of sight or out of mind? Does it mean that we only experience bliss when the pain isn't that near to us. And I just know that if I'm asking this question, you might be asking this question too. And what I've learned in this work that I do is that choosing moments of bliss or listening for the sparks of bliss is not about ignoring pain. It's actually about being present to love fully and to become an agent of hope in a hurting world. In fact, it's these little sparks of bliss that are exactly what gives us the strength to face the pain. So today, I want to give you 3 guiding principles that help us align with a life that sparks bliss even amidst pain and sorrow. Okay, so the first principle is embracing hope. Now, I have to say that the master of living a life of hope is Betsy Guerra. Betsy Guerra wrote a book, which I'm very proud to say that I collaborated with and helped her put out in the world, called Hurt to Hope, Heal the Pain of Loss, Grief, and Adversity. And in that book, she goes in depth into creating a life that creates hope, that embraces hope, and that transforms your hurt into hope. So make sure you read that book. I am going to put the link in my show notes because it is a must read. But there was one thing about hope that I didn't quite understand until recently when I read an article by Eric Barker. He was reviewing another book about hope, actually written by Shane Lopez. And in that review, he shared the distinction between optimism and hope. Now, this resonated with me deeply because for a long time, I've struggled with the question, is the reason that I promote a life of bliss because I am overly optimistic? Is it that? I think people look at me as like an optimistic person. And I always question that, like, is this overly optimistic viewpoint on life? Is it, toxic positivity? You hear these words and you're like, wait, am I falling prey to that kind of thing? And the truth is that I've never really believed that I'm a overly optimistic person. I've actually always considered myself to be quite a realist person. And because I am such a student of Stoicism, I tend to reject overly optimistic ideals, even though I think I'm often identified as an optimist. So then I read this article and it shed light on this question that I've had. And it dawned on me that this is precisely how you align with a life of bliss amidst sorrow and pain. You see, Shane Lopez explains that the difference between being optimistic and being hopeful is that you are optimistic when you think the future will be better than the present, but you are hopeful when you think that the future will be better and that you have a role in making it so. Optimism is passive. It's the expectation that good things will come. Hope is active. Hope is the belief that you can do something to make things better. In moments of heartbreak, it is hope that will keep you grounded. Not because things are magically going to get better, but because you know that you can take one step forward. You can put one foot in front of the other and you can get through this difficult time. And hope is what gives us permission to open our eyes and find the bliss, even in the painful moments, because it is the understanding that although you cannot control everything that is happening around you, you cannot control your exterior circumstances, you can always control how you choose to look at the world, how you choose to react, and how you choose to move forward. And this teaches us that even amidst heartbreak, even amidst pain, even amidst tragedy, where there is hope, there can always be bliss. Okay, so the second principle is that bliss and pain can coexist. Sometimes bliss shows up in the middle of the pain. I'm thinking about a story in particular. It was when my dad was really sick. He was doing an alternative treatment. My dad struggled with cancer for a long time, and things got really bad towards the end, but that man gave it a go, man. Like, he did all sorts of stuff to try to save his life towards the end, and to battle this cancer. And one of the things that he did was he found this Chinese doctor here in Miami that had an alternative medicine treatment and supposedly was having a lot of success in helping people heal from cancer. The only problem was that he only works in the middle of the night. So I think he gets to the office somewhere around 2 or 3 a.m. I don't think you can make appointments. And then he comes in and he'll see you anytime between like 3 a.m. and 7 a.m. or something like that. So you have to show up at this office at around 12 a.m. and sit there and wait to see if he has time to see you. And you're just there for hours and hours and hours. And even though this sounds pretty inconvenient and stressful and sad, because we really didn't know if this was going to work or if my dad was going to make it, or, what we were doing there, I remember sitting in that waiting room, looking at my dad and having the understanding that this is the moment. This will be a story I'll remember one day. This is it. Even if he doesn't survive, even if it doesn't work, I'll always have this moment. And we'd sit there, and together we would laugh at the ridiculousness of what it was that we were doing. Like, it just was bizarre. And we'd be like, this is so crazy that we're sitting here, but here we are. And this moment that could otherwise have been a moment to complain about, or another part of our traumatic story of my father's battle with cancer, it was beautiful. It was hilarious. It was borderline fun. It was ours. And in that, there is bliss. Amongst all that, there is a spark of bliss. I think also about when my sister was having her amputation, the day of the surgery, our whole family was there. We were sitting there, and I remember everybody was just so terrified. There was so much uncertainty. We didn't know. When she went into the surgery, we didn't know if when she got out, she was going to have half a foot or she was going to have no leg, because the doctor was going to have to make the call during the surgery depending on how bad things were. He was like, look, if I have to cut off the leg, I'm going to have to make that decision while I'm in there. So, we just didn't know what was going to happen. Furthermore, we weren't even 100% certain that she'd survive the surgery. She'd been through 6 or 5 other procedures, been under general anesthesia, was morbidly obese, was having all sorts of complications health-wise, and we didn't know how things were going to turn out. And yet, while we were sitting there in the waiting room, my family, my immediate family, there was a moment where the sadness was lifted, and we began reminiscing about our grandparents, stories of the past, hilarious things that, our family members did. Every family has their quirks and their funny stories and their inside jokes and the elaborated tales that get passed from one generation to the next. And here we were sitting there, enjoying this togetherness, laughing together, bonding together, having a moment that would have never existed but for being in this painful situation that we were in. At one point, my brother and I and my niece wanted to blow off some steam and move our bodies. So we started walking around the atrium, and my brother started walking very, very quickly, and it just kind of became a joke, and he was panting, hyperventilating, and I started taking video, and it was so fun, and we laughed. And then before you know it, we were back in the room with my sister, and we were in the pain again. The pain didn't go away, and yet joy snuck into the moment. And once again, I started to realize that bliss and pain often coexist. My friend Aline, Betsy's husband, described feeling bipolar after his daughter died because he'd be sobbing one moment and laughing until his belly hurt the next. Grief and gratitude, laughter and loss. These are not contradictions. Somehow, they're often companions. And it is okay to experience the duality of it all. And then lastly, the third principle is the radical responsibility to carry the light. There's another book that I have been coming back to. I read this years ago, and I'm not one to reread books, but I don't know why I felt called to reread this book again. And it was Napoleon Hill's Outwitting the Devil. Now, this is a book about an interview that Napoleon Hill had in meditation, according to him, with the devil. And he describes the devil, which is really just a way of describing negativity and evil, the bad stuff, as thriving in fear, in darkness, and in lack of critical thinking. So he's in this interview, the devil shares all his secrets, and he confesses that the only way to defeat his work in this world is through the opposition, what he calls the opposition. And the opposition is light. The opposition is what we call God, heaven, all the good stuff, right? So the devil represents the bad stuff, God represents the good stuff. And so he describes what light looks like. It looks like faith. It looks like hope. It looks like wonder and joy and courage. It looks like resilience. It looks like independent thinking, critical thinking, asking questions, challenging thoughts, having the ability to change your mind. And it dawned on me as I was reading this book that pain in and of itself is not bad. Pain is fertilizer for growth, like my friend Betsy says. The problem with pain is the thoughts that come with it. It's the darkness that comes with it. It's the suffering that comes with it. That we feel like once we've experienced it, we cannot get out of it. It's falling into the hole and not being able to get out of the darkness. And that, the being stuck down there, that is the work of the devil. And the only way out is through the light. The only way out is through humor, through faith and hope and wonder and resilience. That is the only way to crawl out of that. That is what defeats the devil. And just to add a little bit to that, I think about that quote from Seneca. Once again, I talk about this all the time in different podcasts, but it's this quote that we suffer more in imagination than in reality. And even in these moments, when we feel pain, for example, when we look at the pain, we think about someone else's pain and we wonder how on earth they're getting through it. Because in our imagination, it would destroy us. But in reality, when we are faced with that kind of pain, we rise. we grow. We hold on to hope. We find our way back. I heard this coach, Melanie Ann Layer, say this once. She said, we will always wonder how we are going to get through something until the day we look back and wonder how we got through it. When I thought about all of this, I realized this is why we have to take radical responsibility and continue to show up in light, even when the world feels heavy. Even when we are afraid that celebrating or showing up joyfully is inappropriate, even when we feel guilty that someone else is going through a difficult time, even when we ourselves are feeling pain, it is exactly in these moments that we get to carry the light. It is not because we are ignoring the pain. It's because we are refusing to let it have the final say. We are refusing to be sucked in by the bad. We are embracing the hope. We are acknowledging that bliss and pain can coexist. And we are holding ourselves responsible to be the light amidst the darkness when other people can't do it. When other people are drowning, we've got to extend our hands and help them up. We can't jump in the pool and drown with them. It does not help anybody. This is the moment where we have to rise above so that they can join us and find their way back out of the holes. That is why this matters. So no, aligning with a life that sparks bliss doesn't mean you are toxically positive or overly optimistic or disconnected with reality. It also does not mean that you are turning your back on the world's suffering. It simply means you are choosing to keep your heart open, to honor both heartbreak and beauty. Like Glennon Doyle says, to celebrate a life that is both beautiful and brutal. It is brutal. Because in the end, choosing bliss is not about escaping pain. It's about responding to your life with love, with laughter, with presence, and about opening your eyes and catching the sparks, even if they're fleeting, even if they're momentary, even if they're dim. It's about saying, even here and even now, there is still light. I hope that if you are experiencing the pain of the world, that you will remember to always look for the sparks of bliss that are already within you. Only that will defeat the bad in this world. Only that will allow the good to prevail. Now, today is Easter, and many of you are celebrating Jesus Christ's resurrection. The very essence of what we believe, that from pain we can rise, that even in death we can resurrect, that there is always light and there is always hope for something bigger and brighter, and that there will be joy in the world again. Happy Easter, happy Sacred Sunday, and I will see you all next week. That's it for today's episode. Thanks so much for being here. I am deeply, deeply grateful for this time to connect. If you're loving this podcast, I'd love if you could support me by subscribing, rating, and or leaving a review wherever you listen to podcasts. Those reviews help us so much. And if you know of someone who could really use a voice like mine in their head, please share this with them and let them know how much you care about their bliss. Now, if you are feeling called to dig deeper and really work on elevating your mindset, wellness, and your relationships to create a healthier, happier, and more meaningful life, then I invite you to schedule a 60-minute complimentary consultation with me. Let's have a meaningful conversation and see if working together is in our future. You can find the link to the calendar of consults right there in my show notes, but you can also connect with me on my website, carolinedeposada.com, or just send me a DM on Instagram at carolinedeposada. Like my friend always says, the project is big and you're a part of it. So thanks for being here.